Hello, Mr. Rashid Ajami. It has been a minute or two since we last spoke, hasn't it, mate?
In a long time. It's good to be with you.
Indeed, mate. Indeed, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to reconnect with you because for those who are maybe followers of Rashid and what he's getting up to now and the amazing labels he's starting to put stuff out on, where I take credit for the fact that we had him first on Chapter 24 many years ago.
100%. And it's one of the only remixes that I've ever done, funny enough.
Yeah.
I saw a few remixes and I really enjoyed that one. It was great.
Oh, totally, yeah. And if memory serves me correctly, the pair of us actually played together at one of our parties. I think it was our second ever party, something like that, in like 2014, 2015, something like that.
Good times. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I was rowdy that night in the Star of Kings, right, in King's Cross.
Yeah, of course. That was a great night.
Oh, dude, like, I loved that place because it was just such a sweat pit with, like, low ceilings, a roughly kind of compromised sound system, but nobody fucking cared, do you know what I mean?
Honestly, the vibe was amazing. People were grooving. Like it's a great venue.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the type of parties that make me hanker for it all coming back, hopefully soon, right?
Yeah, definitely. Is it still open, that place, or it's?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I mean, I've obviously I've not been to London in such a long time with everything going on, and we I'm not sure whether you know this, but we brought the label to a close in December.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We
Oh.
decided to kind of close the book because we had no more chapters to write. If you want me to run that analogy into the ground, like.
Well, that's cool in a way to have a label that tells a story, which you were doing, and the way you were putting out the music, it really felt very genuine and real, the story side. And, it comes to a close and then there's something new, a new project. And I like
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that whole thing was we always kind of wanted to leave people wanting more to an
yeah,
extent. And we never felt the need to be like, because I've seen labels do this where like they have a hot patch, and this is no disrespect to anyone, but you get into like 100, 200 releases, and it's like, okay, like this thing could have been put out of its like a TV show that went on like 3 seasons too long. Do you know what I mean?
Lost. Remember the show Lost? That's my
Oh,
thing.
oh my God! Like I lost interest after season one, and afterwards, from what I'd heard, I felt like it was a wise decision because that was going to be 8 years of my life I was never going to get back. Do you know what I mean?
Very good decision, really. I wasted 8 years of my life.
Well, I'm glad you took the pain, so I didn't have to, mate. I'm very clear, very happy with that. Do you know what I mean? But it's like I mean, again, to use that analogy, I always love like art and television shows that service story first and foremost, which means like in The Wire, for example, like when certain characters were killed off, even though they were favorites, or like the Red Wedding in like Game of Thrones, it's like story first, and if you've got nothing else to say, then don't say anything, And we just felt like we'd told all the story that we wanted to tell, and we wanted to leave people wanting more. And part of the reaction of closing the label was really interesting because there were loads of people like emailing us going, "Oh, I'm devastated. Like, obviously loved what you were doing and everything else." And me and Sam and Marcus were like, "Yeah, got him."
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's what we wanted, like, and
Easy.
that's the thing, man. Sometimes you've got to make these things scarce. I think a certain amount of scarcity in the world is a good thing on some cases.
Completely in our industry. I mean, that's one thing for sure is how you create a product or something that people take the time, they appreciate it because it's scarce. It's not like it's how you really fully appreciate it. That's why I like the fact that vinyl's coming back to some degree. It's like when I go to a vinyl shop, I can actually enjoy listening to the track. Do I want to buy this? Listen to the whole thing. I like that experience. So I completely agree with you.
Oh, totally, yeah. And it's interesting because I actually had an actual pint of beer outside with another human being the other day for the first time in a long time. It was a novel experience, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
And it was quite interesting because it was with a friend of mine, and he works for one of the big pressing houses. And I said to him, like, "What's the last year been like?" He went, "Dude, I've been working 18 hours a day." Like vinyl has just been flying out. In fact, we've been having like production problems because of the pandemic because we can't get enough vinyl out to people.
Yeah, it's coming back in a massive way. In a massive way, which I love. I think it's a really beautiful way to listen to music, and it slows people down and it actually gets them to listen to the to the piece fully.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, I'm also I'm kind of committing the cardinal sin at the moment because I'm actually thinning down my vinyl collection because I'm looking to move at some point. And it's a very difficult exercise because like my upbringing was in record shops. Like I was hanging around record shops, like I was selling vinyl to like Yusef in like 1995 when I was on my like work experience from high school. And like it's always been part of my sort of like, it's running through my veins basically. So it's been hard because like, I've got so much stuff from owning record stores, from working in them. I've got so much stuff I'm so sentimentally attached to as well. And I think, you know, obviously you could go on, and everyone has gone on ad nauseum about the last year and everything, to the point where, quite frankly, I'm a little bit bored of it now. And it's like everybody kind of knows what's gone on. But one of the beautiful things is, like you were saying, it's giving people a chance to slow down a little bit. And I think that's probably part of the key as to why vinyl has kind of continued to escalate in sales. I had the European artist relations rep for Bandcamp on this podcast a couple of weeks ago. And he said something mind-blowing. Bandcamp sold 500,000 cassette tapes last year.
Wow.
So it's not... Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, so people are just looking for... And it's funny because when you think about, like, you know, the whole thing that's happening in crypto at the moment with, like, NFTs and stuff like that as well, there seems to be this renewed interest in things that are not infinite because, therefore, they carry value and they can carry more than just monetary value. They can carry sentimental value as well. Completely.
And I think the NFT thing is a great example of that. It's how do you actually create a unique product in the digital space where it feels a little bit more limited, or, you know, especially from the music side. It's very, I'm looking at that a lot actually at the moment because it's a very interesting space.
Yeah, we had Bjorn from a music streaming platform called Rocky, which is going to be like crypto backed, and also he did one of the first music NFTs with Guy J a while back, and that went really, really well. So I think it's all very early stage, very Wild West with all of this stuff, which means it's as exciting as it is potentially kind of problematic in some ways. But I do see enough potential in it that long term, I think we're going to be able to iron out these issues, and it's going to become something really, really viable in the next sort of 2 to 3 years.
Definitely. 100% agree.
Yeah.
It's what's cool. It's like a new mechanism to distribute, you know, whether it's art, music, or blending visual art with music. It creates this whole new medium that one can explore and utilize, which is refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting from the fact that, you know, we now have something kind of viable now to look at and say, actually, like, and again, this is one of the things we've been teaching on the platform, is like really being sovereign and being really like in ownership of your entire path, from revenue streams to music sales, merchandise sales, then obviously extending to NFTs and stuff like that as well. And I think that's going to be part of the big revolution, because, you know, even today, it's like, you know, you look at the big news with Spotify today, it's like they don't have enough money, or Daniel Ek doesn't have enough money to pay an artist properly, but apparently he's got £3 billion to buy Arsenal Football Club.
Insane.
Like, there's something deeply wrong at that stage. And I think this is part of maybe a wider correction of the entire industry in a way.
Completely. And it's funny because, you know, when I never used to think about the financial side of putting out music. And you know, I've always been a producer first. Like, I started as a producer before DJing or doing any live performances. So I've had long stretches where really I'm only just producing and putting out music. And it was always frustrating in a way that like making money from it's is like a write-off. It's just purely something I do for my own artistic, you know, creativity, for fun. I never think about it in a viable business, you know, as a viable business, unless you're doing the live side, which, you know, this year has shown us that the live side can come to a halt. So when it does come to a halt, how can you be a full-time artist and actually live off of that, create music? That's how you make that music, do the, you know, get the best artwork, get the, you know, whatever it might be, and actually make money from it. It is crazy kind of how the industry is a bit flawed in that way, but this could definitely be an interesting correction that allows people to monetize.
And it's interesting to take it from your sort of standpoint because, you know, as you mentioned before we went on air, that we started recording, that, you know, you're coming back to the music industry full time because you've got a background in entrepreneurship. So it must be quite interesting, like sort of re-engaging with the dance music industry at this time, having had a lot of experience on the more entrepreneurial sort of tech side of things as well.
100%. And I mean, I had a lot of regrets when I stopped or slowed down on the music. I mean, now I have a lot of regrets because I had such momentum at the time in the music industry, and I kind of just fell into just doing this technology company. And I was so busy trying to work out how to do that and run a business, and, you know, startups, they consume so much of your time. So, it really put a halt to that momentum that I had with the music. And after a few years, I realized my real passion still lies with making music, creating art, not just music, but how do you blend all sorts of kind of forms of art together, you know, whether it's film, music, installations, gallery works, NFTs. It's really, that's where my proper passion lies. So coming back to it now full time, it's definitely interesting to see how does one, if you don't just DJ and rely on live, how do you create a sustainable, you know, brand, industry, you know, whatever it might be. That's something it's very interesting, and I don't think there's an answer yet, but I can feel for people that are like pure artists, because it's not easy in that to find that.
Yeah, totally. And I kind of count myself as being extremely fortunate that I've had like other skills over the years, like teaching, like being able to build a platform like this. Like this has been the thing that's really sustained me and got me to get up in the morning, quite frankly, you know, over the last year or so, because like I've been quite honest with like people listening to this podcast and with guests that I'm in that camp now where, you know, I'm not really that interested in like touring anymore, because I've kind of lived that life, and I feel like I've kind of, you know, been there, done that, and kind of got the t-shirt at my age now. And I'm interested in other things. Like I'm interested in helping people. I'm interested in, you know, being of service and helping people grow, as well as, you know, taking my music in slightly different directions. So it's been really interesting to see, like you were saying, like now having all of these things open up, to be able to actually earn a good living without having to feel the need to be, you know, having to get on a plane or be in a nightclub at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning when you actually like don't want to. I think a lot of artists, and this sort of plays into like, you know, the mental health thing as well. I think a lot of artists have been forced into that because it was the only sustainable way to make a living. And nowadays, like, I think it's going to be much healthier, because I've spoken to a lot of artists. I've had Josh Butler on the podcast recently. You know, Patrice was on a while ago, Patrice Baumel. And, you know, we've all been talking about how when it starts to kind of normalize again, like how we're going to all be approaching this in like very different, much more balanced ways. Because it's, you know, from your sort of entrepreneurial background, like finding that balance, like you said, is very, very difficult to nigh on impossible.
Yeah, completely. And it's funny because for me, I have a lot of energy to go and maybe do that touring and DJing, because I haven't done it so much. You know, I got into the production side, started to get a few gigs, you know, it was great, but I didn't have the full-blown touring experience. So I am all for that, and I am interested in doing that, and I definitely have a passion for the live side. But I can fully understand that it is frustrating as a music producer when you have to dedicate a lot of time to being in the studio and really crafting out like good music. It takes time, when that's not and you can't really monetize that fully. I mean, I make a joke in terms of when I do contracts with record labels, and I have a music lawyer that helps out, and I tell him, I'm paying you more than I'm going to make just to look at the contract. I'm going to make from 10 years of this release going out. I mean, if they take 20%, 50%, it doesn't really matter in the end, because there's so little money, even if it's a hit, even if it's a big track. I'm not going to make a living from sales of music. But the sales of music is just, the music coming out is a way to establish yourself, to then go and, do an NFT or get live performances, or as you've done, build a really, interesting brand of a podcast, different things, teaching, helping people. So I've always seen the music almost like the gate that opens up the other opportunities.
Yeah, it's totally right. Absolutely. Because again, the model is just so different now compared to, what it was sort of like, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that, where, an artist would make an album or a series of releases and then go off and tour that and then get back in the studio to do that. But then the physical sales and the underpinnings of it would, provide at least a sustainable living at that point. So again, like the game is so different, but again, it feels like because of the pressure of the last year, we're about to undergo another very exciting revolution where all of a sudden, like the main thing that I felt with the whole NFT thing was like, I feel like huge possibility and excitement and potential from this space. It's definitely, like as we mentioned before, not perfect, but there's something there, and there's something there that's worth exploring, and something that, a lot of people are doing quite well with already, so yeah, it's super cool. So what triggered the sort of move back into making music full time? And, was it like just you couldn't stay away from it, or, just tell me what it was.
Yeah, I started, I'd taken a long time off where I just wasn't making music. And then, last year I just started to slowly get back into it, and immediately just felt that enjoyment of putting tracks together. I mean, for me, the happiest moment in my life is that moment I'm in the studio and something just comes together in the right way, and I feel I have something special that I feel, and I have this feeling from it. Like, it's just the greatest experience for me. So I realized, it's really what I love. I've done a lot of reflecting over the last years in terms of what's important. And yes, making money is important, like building a business is important to some degree, but really doing what you love is the most important thing, and it's where like true happiness comes from. So for me, I felt the music is where that lies, and I just felt the need to kind of transition back into it.
Yeah, wicked. Well, you know what, mate, you've been sorely missed as far as I'm concerned, and it's great to see you back in the pocket, and it's just so refreshing to hear like somebody say that, because I think a lot of artists, again, because of that need to kind of like earn that sustainable living and the pressure that comes, we tend to, like, I don't know how to put it, we sort of put the cart before the horse a little bit, and we start to get into a frame of mind of like, well, I'm going to make this track because it's going to get me on this label. And when I'm on this label, I'm going to get here and I'm going to be able to make money, and then I'm going to be happy. Whereas yourself, you've just said, it's like you're doing it because you fucking love it, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, and because I've been lucky that in my early days I managed somehow to get onto some good labels. I've been on some great labels in the past, and I know what that experience is like. To me, that's never been the exciting bit, because it's actually, as much as being on great labels is important, it doesn't make you like instantly famous. It doesn't blow your music up whatsoever. I mean, all the good labels I've been on them, it's about consistency and like putting out great music consistently and being in the scene consistently and growing. There's no such thing as the one-off. Okay, a few people have that where they have like a one-off hit and they blow up, but it's so rare for that to happen. So to me, I'm at a point now where even if I have a release getting signed to a great label, I'm happy, I'm grateful for it for sure, because it's a great way to get exposure. But really, the happiness for me is now coming from when I'm in the studio and I feel the track coming together in the way that I want it to come together. And it starts to give me that like feeling of just, if it's a sexy track, I feel it. If it's an emotional track, I feel it. That's the point where I'm actually at my happiest. And then I let it go into the world and see what happens.
Yeah. That's such a healthy, lovely attitude to have towards it, where I think, we all make this mistake of sometimes placing too much emphasis and too much meaning and too much value and expectation on like a single thing. Like, I remember like a couple of years ago I had a release on Bedrock, And even me in my position with all my miles on the clock, because I'd predominantly done engineering for other artists, like it was a big moment for me to see that on, like, because I've got, like, talking about vinyl, I've got Bedrock Heaven Sent, the original white label promo, on vinyl. Like, that's how far back I go with Bedrock. So to have my name be seen on that release was a massive moment for me. And even I, like, with all my experience, went, right, here we go. And it's like, I'm waiting for my life to change, and it's like, oh. And we're all culpable of that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I listen to a lot of, like, podcasts with sports people and people who have done great things and won, like, Olympic gold medals. And it's like, I remember Bradley Wiggins saying, like, I won the Tour de France and I came home and, like, I still had to kind of, like, put my trash out, and I still had to, like, go to Tesco's and, like, wipe me kids' arses and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, my life just didn't change because I won a bike race,
It's so funny. I've experienced that time and time again, and it's so true. And it's because of that my attitude changed. Now I'm more mature, I guess, and I've reached that point where you realize, a good label is signing the record is a great sanity check that you have a well-produced track, it's compositionally good, that's original, to whatever degree, not always original, but that, it's something that you don't just love it, it's something that, works for other people potentially. So it's a really good, like, it's another milestone I like, because it means what you've made is solid and people like it. But definitely for me, like, now it's about actually achieving my own goals in the studio, and it's me against me in that sense.
Yeah,
versus,
yeah.
Like, where I'm going, what label I'm going to be on. Like, can I make a track that has this level of soul to it and feels like this special and gives me that feeling? And if it does, and I hope then other people will experience that same thing, that like the same kind of stuff that I like.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to give yourself time and space to be able to develop that sound, right? And figure out what your voice actually is through, just wild experimentation. Like, one of my favorite techniques on that is, like, I'll have a day where I'm not writing music in the studio at all. I've always said this, like, I'm having a competition with myself to make the weirdest noise. And I love those sessions because I can just get lost for hours in programming synths and weird plugins and, that kind of thing. I'm doing that a lot recently because I bought a Virus TI Polar. Managed to pick one up with a very, very good price tag, and I'm just having a ball with that thing because it can just do the most ungodly things. So it's amazing to have that. And, I think the thing you're getting at is, you mentioned, like, the word signposts. I think we get confused and think that there's some sort of, like, final destination, when actually there's only the process, and that's it.
Yeah, literally. And once someone can truly enjoy the process, with the positives of the process, the negatives of the process, the problems that come with the process, and you take it all as this enjoyable journey, then that's when I feel one is at their most powerful in terms of what they can do, and the creativity and just the ability to really, really do the best work possible. I mean, when I was younger and producing, I would, like, rush a lot because I just felt, I want to finish this, I want to send it to a label, and I want to get it done. And it wasn't fun. It wasn't a fun process. I felt anxious in the process, like, oh, this sounds really good, but can I really get it to be, what it should be? And, there's negativity to that. Now that's gone. It's just this really patient, flowing process of
love it
coming to a final product. And I actually believe when you produce music, for me at least, I have to kind of produce quite quickly, because there's a point where I lose my, like, objectivity of the track. If I get too sick of the sounds too quickly, and I'm on, like I can, so there's like I try to get the main composition done quite quickly, and then from there, like, I take much more time on refining it to the end product. So the first 80% of the track for me comes really quick. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just, I kind of know what I want to happen, and I know my instruments well enough to just get to that 80%. And then at the 80%, I take a breather and then finalize that last 20%.
Yeah, definitely.
how other people work, but it's always been like that for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it's, you know, even in sort of the education space, there's a lot of that of like, you know, get this done as quickly as possible, and you know, here's like 50 workflow hacks to, you know, help you finish your tracks in like, you know, half the amount of time and all this kind of stuff. And it's an interesting thing because it's like, you know, that's kind of anathema to the creative process in a lot of ways, because it's like, as you say, it's like it's good to get to a point where it's like, okay, I've got something here that I know is going to become a like a work of art,
Yeah.
but the details of really taking it to the ultimate potential, that takes time. It's like, you know, they always say about marathon running, isn't it? It's not the 26 miles that kills you, it's the point two at the end.
Yeah. Completely. And that's where I've seen so many talented producers, like just my friends and people who make music that I've come across, that they just don't finish tracks. They have all these tracks that are like kind of 80% there. They've done that 80% of the composition of, you know, here are the sounds. This is what it kind of feels like, sounds like, but they just don't finish them. And that's why I think there's like the phase one is so important, of just composing from scratch, coming up with an idea, and then you have that idea, and then you have that really final important bit of the 20% where you slow down and you take that thing all the way to like a really polished mix, good arrangement, little sounds here and there, or whatever it might be, retract, add. You're just getting to that final balance where the final product is something that I can listen to 10 times on repeat, and every time I'm just like, okay, this is great. It's there.
Yeah.
It feels right.
That's the best feeling of all, isn't it? You know, when you think, I could sit here and listen to this all day, and it's your own track, which sounds awfully egotistical to say, but it's actually the truth.
It's the best feeling because it's like, it's kind of rare, as you know, like, you know, when you produce, almost, you always, like for me, I always still feel my tracks are like not as good as other people's tracks, you know, like even from a production standpoint, even though
Isn't
other
that irrelevant though, isn't it, really, when you think about it?
It's a thing, like it's a self-critique thing where always with our own stuff, we finish it and we push it away a little bit, you know, you like, that's what I do. But when you have that track that you're like, oh, I'm feeling this, and like, it gives me that feeling every time, and it's your own track, those ones always do the best.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It's funny, like, because you know, we do these like sort of group feedback sessions, like on the platform, where like the whole community comes together, and it's honestly like it's just joyous. So we've had this with one of our members recently, and the guy's so unbelievably talented, and it's so funny because like he kept on bringing like new versions of this track, and he was like, right, I don't know where I'm up to here, and like everybody in the comments is like, oh my god, this thing's unbelievable, can't believe it, sounds amazing, this has got a massive label written all over it, and I'm just sat there going, I want more. This has got another level in it. And then he'd come back the next week and say, listen to this, and I go, good, amazing, more please. And I just kept pushing him and pushing him and pushing him and pushing him till last week he puts the final version in, and it just absolutely, like, it just rocked everybody off the seats, like, and it's like, okay, now it's ready. So that's like a testament to what you're talking about that last 20%, and being patient and not like robbing yourself of the opportunity, because I think that's where a lot of artists go wrong, right? They really rob themselves of the opportunity to really refine. It's a bit like writing a book, right? You know, it'd be like putting the first draft of a book into a publisher.
Exactly.
You know, rather than going through that refinement, editing process, you know, sculpting it, bringing it down to what it absolutely needs to be, cutting the fat out of it, all that kind of thing. I think that's also one of the reasons why, like, you know, with all due respect to a lot of artists, like, to me now, I think like the vast majority of dance music I hear is kind of a bit lifeless. And I think that's why, because we're so focused on like, I'm doing these steps very robotically in the same order. And like, that's a bit like, how can I put it? It's a bit like what you're a baker, but you're working in Greg's and not in a restaurant.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that, because it's exactly what I'm experiencing at the moment as I start to like explore music. I made it like a thing now where, you know, as part of going back to DJing, I'm starting to explore a lot of music and listen to like music on Beatport and SoundCloud and whatever. And I'm trying to take a process of really only choosing music that really makes me feel something. And I'm hearing so many tracks on like really top labels where they're cool, I get it, they're okay, but they feel lifeless. They're just lacking anything that's really wow. Like I can see that if I played it on a dance floor, yes, people will dance, but it's not a track to remember. So I feel like a successful thing is when you put a track out and you can't forget it. Like Pashanga Boy's Time, like it's just you just can't forget that track. It's just every time I listen to it, it's just it transports you somewhere. It has this feeling of nostalgia in it. It's just so well emotionally fueled, and I can't explain why it's like that, but for whatever reason, it makes you feel something, and so much music is lacking that. From what I'm seeing and hearing at the moment.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because it makes you wonder, well, what is that thing? What is that element? And why do some artists seem to have it in droves and others seem to, only kind of glimpse it ever so slightly? And it's an interesting thing because, for me, I think there's a certain level of like presence in the moment that needs to happen. Like at the moment of creation, where one of the things I've been talking about a lot recently, and actually like I've been taking lessons in like classical music theory because I'm really interested in like I'm kind of like in transition myself more towards doing more film and television stuff and film music and stuff. So I've been working with this guy and he's amazing. He's got absolutely no understanding of electronic music at all, which is so refreshing to me because he's like, I'm like, Sasha and Digweed, and he's like, Bartok and Liszt and, that kind of thing. Like, basically, like, Bach and like Tchaikovsky's like his Sasha and Digweed, basically. Do you know what I mean? And he actually said, he summed it up perfectly. He said, when it comes to things like, say, harmony and chord progressions and stuff, he said, like, you want to learn as much about it as possible, and then you want to forget it all instantly.
Yeah.
And it's so true because, like, you want to learn it to a point where it becomes so automatic that you don't think about it anymore, and it just becomes almost like an instinctive thing. And I think a lot of artists are at various stages of their development, and it's all cool and it's all good, but that's where you get that very sort of like rote, by the numbers, paint by numbers kind of music, because there's not really that sort of level of like mastery going on, or that level of like real deep, almost like spiritual sort of like awareness going on at the moment of creation. And I think that's what really separates like the really amazing, the great artists from what Massimo Plex called the artisans, which are the people who can basically just knock something out for you like almost on demand.
Yeah it's funny that you say spiritual awareness, because I completely agree with that. It's like almost that you're like getting it out of the way of yourself in that moment, and it's just like a happening of creativity. I've always had that with all the kind of tracks that have the most feeling that I've produced. There's like a 20-minute, 30-minute period or whatever it is where it's just like happens, and the sounds might change and there's tweaking and stuff, but just the general few layers that make the heart of the track just come out. And it just comes out immediately. It's not like a 4-hour, 5-hour, 6-hour process of just trying a bunch of melodies. It really just comes really quickly, and then that refinement occurs after. So I really believe in that. Like it's almost those moments where it just kind of it happens.
Absolutely. Do you think environment matters in this kind of thing, where the space or the location, not just like, say, for example, where your studio is or like the makeup of your studio, that obviously matters, but like geographically, like where you find yourself in the world, like does the physical like reality of like where you make music, do you think that has like an effect on it as well?
For me personally, it's not so much where I've been, but it's more how I feel when I produce. It's more of, it's so like like the lockdown. A lot of people in the lockdown in London were kind of like, oh, it's a depressing time. Nothing's happening, and there were many days where I did feel frustrated, and so I just wouldn't make music. I'll just go for a walk. I'll just take a breather. But when I find myself in that place of just feeling open and positive, that's what like kind of allows me to create good music. And I could be in LA and it's the sun is shining and it's like paradise, but I'm not making my best music. It's just it. So I've not had that where it's kind of linked to where I am, and I've had inspiration from certain locations for sure, but for me it's feeling based. Everything comes from it's a feeling based process. And even as you're saying, like forgetting how to actually forgetting the technicality of the composing, I've like totally forgot that. So it's all, when I'm playing a keyboard, it's really feeling based. I'm not thinking about what's the scale and what's like the notes. I'm not even good with that. It just all comes from like a feeling and a knowing of like where to kind of take it. And that's what gives me the heart of the track every time.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I've got to admit, it's definitely been that way for me. Like my feeling has been like I've always been a little bit of a product of my environment in a weird way. Because I have moved around the world quite a bit like yourself, like we were talking before we started recording, that you also used to live in LA, also very curiously in exactly the same sort of area that I lived in as well. And it was remarkable to me because like it was the first time I'd worked properly in like a real studio when I worked with Sasha like 5 or so years ago when we did See and Delete together. And we did it in the Village in LA where, Smashing Pumpkins did Melancholy in that studio, and Fleetwood Mac and all these legends. Like, regular listeners to this podcast are probably bored of me hearing these stories now about me telling them. But it was just, you couldn't not make amazing music in that space because the creativity just dripped from the walls. Like, it was almost like, the way it rains sweat on a dance floor in a really good club, it was like it was just raining inspiration from every surface, and you couldn't not do your best work in a place like that.
I totally understand that. The energy of the place just...
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, for me, it's like sometimes, like when I go through a bit of a dry spell, I find, and that's been one of the more interesting aspects of the last year, was like, if I've found myself a little bit low on inspiration, I'd just pack myself off to like Ibiza or, like Lisbon for a week and take my headphones and my laptop with me, and then I would just be in a completely different zone, completely different place. But again, having to actually work through that frustration because that ability to move to a different location wasn't available, I think is almost as rewarding as being able to move, if you get what I mean, because again it's like it's changing your environment in order to get that feeling that you were talking about as well.
Totally. So that's the thing, like when stuck in a lockdown, it's almost like you can't change the environment, so you almost have to just adapt the way you feel and get past those kind of days where you just don't want to like hear anything and don't want to make any music, and kind of push. Like for me it would be like going to Hyde Park, just walking around the park, having a coffee, like just letting go a little bit, and then feeling that pocket of inspiration come back, and then I'm onto my keyboard. I'm like, I'm onto a session. It's like in allowing that to power it and to fuel it, basically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's
definitely
cool, man. It's really, really nice stuff. And it's interesting because the thing that kind of got me through those parts was, or those frustrating moments, was something one of my yoga teachers said to me a long time ago, which was like, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah.
And it's like just trying to create that little internal shift of state in yourself can produce unbelievable results, because that's kind of like a lever that you can pull in your brain. That's like, it takes very little energy, but the effect that you get from it is massive. It's like the 80-20 thing, right? It's like 80% of your results come from 20% of your actions.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And it's something that, I mean, just beyond, I had that even when I was doing my business. Like, I think for any kind of work or creativity or anything, like, most people are constantly trying to change the environment or their outside world to feel better on the inside. But ultimately, they just want to feel better on the inside. But they're trying to manipulate the outside world, which is always changing. It's unpredictable. It's never going to be exactly how you want it. Like, no matter who you are, you can't control like the outside world to that degree. So when you start to actually just internally, no matter what's happening, try and be in that positive state and see things differently, see things positively, it's really a dramatic transformation. It's massive. And actually, funny enough, in Los Angeles is when I really realized that. It was like walking around, and I spent a lot of time just like walking around the Venice area, and it's like you see so much happening, so much craziness
It's a
everywhere, and
madhouse,
different.
isn't it? It's a madhouse.
Yeah. You see like realities of people that I just, when you grow up in London, you don't see it. The broad spectrum of like life on this planet, and that to me was really rewarding in terms of just kind of being appreciative for everything, and just it's like a humbling thing to see that, you know what I mean? Like and that spurs creativity, I feel, and just makes you more relaxed and more positive no matter what happens.
Hugely. It's a real melting pot there, and I felt the same way. And even like going back there last year, for NAM and like doing some work with D&B Audio, I'd not been back in like 3 years, because I did my 2 years there, and then I moved back to Europe. And it was the first time I'd been back there, and I literally just went, oh God, now I remember why I fucking love this place so much. Because there's just no other place like it in terms of the movement, the weather, there's just like like the way Ibiza has a vibe, right? It's a totally different vibe to LA, but LA's just got something that is very hard to put your finger on. And it was quite a privilege being there at that time, because about 2015 to 2017 is when the dance scene there just blew up. And I mean like the good dance scene. And it was just everywhere. Lee was playing there all the time with All Day I Dream. There was amazing parties on almost every weekend. And it was just this absolute just, as I say, like this melting pot of like different styles of music, different people coming in and out all the time. And it was a special time to be there. It really was. It's something I would, I'll never forget. Like, I still have a little part of me that still wants to move back there, to be honest with you, at some stage.
I know what you mean. I feel the same. It's a great place to be. Definitely.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's as challenging in some ways as it is amazing, because after 2 years there, like it did burn me out a little bit, if I'm being honest, because it's non-stop. Like, it's absolutely non-stop. I mean, people think London is a 24-hour city. People think New York's a 24-hour city. It's like, no. LA's a 24-hour city.
LA's a 24-hour city, definitely.
Yeah, that's an 8 days a week city, basically. Yeah, in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I mean, so what was one thing I wanted to ask you before we get into more geeky territory of like, what your production setup and what your workflow's like and stuff. Like, obviously, as we mentioned before, like coming back into into dance music from entrepreneurship and having a company and stuff. Was there anything that you learned from that time coming back into dance music that you've applied now, like any sort of transferable skills or any sort of insights that have been useful for you?
Definitely. I think juggling, like when you have a business and you're juggling all the kind of different sides to it, like you have your legal side, your financial side, like you have, dealing with like HR, you get used to being bombarded with problems, and then your relationship to problems kind of changes to that. Like a problem is just an opportunity to just take one step forward, because really, if you're not having a problem, it means you're not progressing. Like really, like progression in anything is just a set of problems, and you kind of go through them and end up with something, and that change in terms of not freaking out every time anything negative happens, which is where I started with my business. Like, like everything was a worry, and like I was just like anxious lunatic all the time. So like just chilling out over the years to be like, oh, cool, okay, we have this problem to deal with, we'll deal with it, and like, we'll see what happens. Taking that into making music and producing music, and the business side of music, like, which can be very slow. For example, you send a demo and you get like a response from some like amazing famous DJ, and you're like, I want to sign this, and then you don't hear from them for 3 months and you're waiting. When I was younger, that would kill me. I'd just be like, oh, I want to know, like, am I getting signed to this label? Is it going to happen? Like, now I just don't even think about it. I've relaxed. It's relaxed me, if that makes any sense. In a way that makes just dealing with the creative process, dealing with the administrational side of it, whatever it is, it's just, I feel like relaxed. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's
Massively.
kind of the core thing that came out of it.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. Like about, problems are like actually signifiers of progress, and you can interpret them as like, the sky's falling in, but actually it's a sign that you're on the right track.
Yeah,
And
like
problems and challenges that are actually compliments in a way.
completely. Like let's say, taking that scenario of not hearing back, you're actually in a position where someone really great wants to sign one of your records. That's a huge positive. Then like, okay, they're not responding or they're taking time, let's say, to decide, causes anxiety, but you're actually in a really positive place because there's someone else who doesn't even have that, like that situation happening to them. Like they don't have an amazing person wanting to sign their track. So you're progressing. But then instead of creating the problem out of it, like, oh, I want this to happen badly, I want to finish this, I want to get it over the line, you're like, okay, it's happening. And this is really positive, and it's a really positive sign. It means my music's good. Whether they sign it or they don't sign it, I'm now on the radar. Whether, whatever happens, this is something to be proud of in its own right. So that's the shift, like that mentally, like has taken me a couple of years and a lot of long walking in LA and contemplating life to get to. But that's the big change, and then
Love
that
it.
translates to your music making process because then you feel better more of the time and you make better music.
I love that. I love that because I feel like the vast majority of my work with NYT is talking people off the ledge in that moment, basically.
Yeah,
It's so funny. It's like, oh my god, like this DJ said he wants to sign my records, but I haven't heard back from him in a day.
that's like, I mean, it's such a classic one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been 4 hours. How come he hasn't decided yet? He's only got 6 labels to run. Why is he not coming back to him?
He's only got. Yeah, exactly. The guy's only got like 6 labels, 2 club events, and 3 kids. It's fine, like funny.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so funny, man. And that's the thing. It's like and what I always say in those situations is like, yeah, you just got to give it time, like And if it has been a long time, like just follow up, be kind, be polite, be assertive, and like be a human being. Like don't be a dick, basically.
Exactly. 100 totally. When I do like follow-ups, I make sure I'm just like super respectful and chill about it. It's like, hey, listen, like take your time, like no worries, like what just checking in if you're still interested. Very relaxed, slow, kind of just making that, especially with our industry, because it's an industry of creative people. So creative people are not, they're not like how people like in investment banking who are still creative, but they're very like intense. Everyone's responding to each other. It's all intense in business. The music industry, it's not as intense. Like if people take their time to process a track, to see if they like it, to see if they want to sign it. People take time because you're dealing with art, essentially. So one has to kind of notch back. It doesn't mean like be lazy or anything. It just means like change your expectations in terms of how the industry is run and adapt to that. And that's kind of what like has definitely been my new approach, and it's much more fun. I'm just, I'm having more fun because of it, and I'm seeing more happen because of it.
Oh, there's so much I can unpack from that. Like, first of all, like one of my favorite sayings is, expectation is just pain that you book in advance.
Yeah.
So, like, why have them in a way? There's the difference between having an expectation and having like a standards.
Yeah.
There's that's a whole other conversation. But I love the fact that you've just layered it with like it's art. Like it's not going to be a linear thing because art by its own nature is not linear. Yeah. Like the creation of it is not linear. The agreement to distribute that art cannot be expected to be linear either. This is not a straight up and down business transaction. It's not like you're buying a MacBook. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's something completely novel and unique unto itself, and that kind of wraps back into what we were saying about problems are compliments in disguise, right? Because it's that whole thing of I'm big into like Ryan Holiday and like the whole stoic thing that he does, and he talks about like one of the names of one of his books was The Obstacle is the Way, and it's the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like there's no way around the problem. There's only a way through it. And actually, that is the signifier of like, once you get over this and on the other side of it, that's the point.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've noticed that, especially in the music industry, and I think it's the same for like the creative industries like film, music, art. When you're starting off, there's a lot of friction against you. It's like very uphill in terms of even getting anyone to respond. Like, let's just take demoing. Like, when I first started demoing, like, no one would even respond. No one knows who I am. Like, I don't have the email addresses. I'm having to like go find like the generic demo email. Like, there's a lot of rejection and a lot of friction, which can be really kind of disconcerting because you, like, let's say, spent the same amount of hours that someone who's super famous has on like a track. You've put your heart into a track that, let's say, is amazing, but then you can't get it out because you don't really, there's like the gatekeepers. There's no way to get to the right people. That's when the people that break through persevere, is they just keep pushing against that obstacle just constantly. You push. You find like one other person who might be able to help you push through that. You just relentlessly push, and it starts to ease up, and then you have your first release, and it's okay, great. I managed to get here, and then it's a slow game. It's a slow burn. So if you're freaking out over every problem, one's going to burn out really quickly. It's like you have to enjoy that like challenge and almost make it like a video game. It's like a video game. It's fun. You're just having to find your way through it. You keep your mood while you're producing. Do it because you love it. Producing because you love the music, even if it means I'm just sending it to my mate and they're like jamming on the track or whatever it is. And as you do that, stay focused. There's like this weird balance, be open, artistic, and stay focused at the same time. That balance to me is like how one starts to see some success in terms of, well, that's kind of how it worked for me, at least. But I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, especially in the early days, I find that's when there's a lot of friction, and the obstacle is the way becomes really critical kind of philosophy to have.
Massive that we're unpacking this, because it's such a common problem for people, and people kind of like give up before they get past all of that, or they're in, like, again, it's like the marathon analogy of, you've ran the 26 miles and you give up before the point 2.
Yeah.
Because you didn't get an answer, or it didn't go the way that you expected it to, you know what I mean? And it's like letting go of those expectations, like, a lot of the time allow things to manifest in a way that you didn't expect, but were actually superior to what, like, your little lizard brain came up with while you were scheming about it one day, you know what I mean? It's like, that's been my journey. It's like,
what you just said now is literally like probably the deepest sentence of all of life. I mean, it's so 100% accurate. It's like, even they say, like, remove desire of what you want to get what you want. It's the same kind of thing. And it always comes in a way better way than you wanted it to, in the way you imagined it. It turns out better if you let go of that, like needing the expectation, wanting it. Because that desire is like a translation of lack. It's like almost the same as lack, because you're lacking it and you're wanting it. It's when you let go of it. It's like in social life. If you're relaxed and you want social life, people they like you more. When you're trying to be like needy or whatever, people push away. It's exactly the same in this.
No, it is. It's absolutely the same. It's absolutely the same. I love the trick that, like, your own mind or your ego, whatever you want to call it, plays on you, though, because I've done that and I'm like, right, I'm letting go of the need to kind of achieve this, but I'm letting go of it because I actually want it far more than I'm actually, like, telling myself. So I'm almost like lying to myself, like, no, I'm letting go. Why are you letting go of it, Paul? Because I really fucking want it, and, like, that's what it said in the book.
So true. It's so true. And it's that hard bit, getting to the point of really letting it go.
Yeah.
It's not, on some stuff I get it, especially when like really great stuff's potentially happening and it's all you've ever wanted, and it's like just let it go.
Yeah, totally. And like that's been totally my path. Like it's all manifested for me in like very weird ways. Like the Sasha thing, for example, was never something I'd even considered. until I sat down with him in Liverpool for a coffee, and he's like, I hear you're moving to LA, and I'm like, I'm considering it, and I was like, well, I'm moving to LA, why don't we get in the studio together? I was like, okay. And it was a very weird situation, that, because I literally went, that was about 3 weeks before I was due to go on the plane. I booked a one-way ticket. I was like, I'm just going to go out there and just see what's what, and just shoot the shit, and if it doesn't work out in a few months, I'll come back, and I've had a good explore, and made some contacts and stuff. And literally I went from just having a one-way flight booked in the space of about 6 hours one Friday. I went from nothing to having an apartment, a studio, and an album to work on with a legend.
Yeah.
And like that unless you make space for that to happen, I had all of these schemes and plans of like what I was going to do to get there. And actually what the way it all happened was, I went, I'm just going to book a one-way flight. I've got some money saved up. I'll figure it out. And then it just kind of almost arrived automatically,
I have the same exact experience and completely agree with that. And it's when you give the space for it to actually happen, and you're just a little bit more open about things and present with like life, and not like stuck in the mind, and you let it, you drop from that needing, expecting into just letting things kind of go. The problem is when you try to explain that to people, sometimes they're like, oh, does it mean I should do nothing and just kind of like, I'm just gonna sit and wait for stuff to happen? And it's like, well, no, it's not that you sit and wait for stuff to happen. It's just you're present and you're going with what's happening, and it just becomes really kind of obvious the next step to take without thinking about 50 steps ahead. You go with that flow, and then it becomes really clear like what needs to be done. It's like this, it's like in the spiritual world, it's like the balance of being and doing. It's like, I'm like being present and I'm being present, I'm doing. It's that balance which kind of, exactly like you said, it just all fell together in this beautiful way.
Yeah, it's what Dr. David Hawkins, who's become one of my favourite sort of spiritual authors and teachers, he calls it power versus force. And it's like everything we're talking about where we're just letting it happen is power, whereas like striving, grabbing for it, that lack that you were talking about before is all force. And if you think about it, like, there's another saying in sort of spiritual circles, isn't there? Whatever you resist persists. And it's like the more you push against things, the less likely it is, like, it's actually the world is going to start like almost like firming up against you, if you know what I mean, a little bit. And like I'm big into yoga and stuff. Like I got qualified as a yoga teacher last year during all the lockdowns and stuff, which was interesting. And one of the things that teaches you is like, especially with the style of yoga that I do, with yin yoga, it's like you have to let go of all tension in the body, because if you start pushing against your own body's gonna stiffen up and resist it and say, hang on a minute, no, these are my limits. But if you actually sort of softly push towards those limits and then learn to let go, you actually melt through them into a whole space that you didn't even know existed.
It's crazy that you mentioned David Hawkins, because I love that guy and his book,
Letting Go.
Letting Go. Like,
I'm literally reading it right now. I've got it right there.
It's phenomenal. It's like there's one chapter, which is like chapter 2, and just that one technique of like kind of just sitting with feelings and letting them go. It's so powerful. It's so powerful, but it's like anything. It's a habit. We're so used to resisting any feeling we have and just contracting against it. And, I don't want to feel like this, as opposed to, like you said, with the yoga, going into it and letting it be fully actually will dissolve that feeling and will take you past it. And it's a much better approach. That's super cool. I love that guy, David Hawkins.
Yeah, he's amazing. Like Sam from chapter 24, like obviously me and him are still best friends basically, like, and we talk all the time, and like we've been going through the David Hawkins books almost together, and just mind blowing. Like, it's really funny actually, because I said to Sam a while ago, so I bought the book because like I had this real deep kind of like resonance of like, I need to read this book. Like, I ordered the book and sat on my shelf for 2 months. And it was like my mind/ego was almost like resisting reading the book, because it knew there was like a very potent, very important lesson or set of lessons in that book, and again, like kind of worked with that and just started gently, almost like reading just a page a day of it. And honestly, like that book is just, it's life changing, and it's been a really great reminder for me a lot, because I mean I've just done a tremendous amount of work on myself in the last sort of few years since coming back from LA, sort of quite burnt out, and that's taken me into like the plant medicine realm and psychedelics and really interesting sort of ceremonial kind of like settings. That's allowed me to do just a tremendous amount of work on myself in a very short space of time. So, letting go was huge for me because it just allowed me to kind of integrate a lot of that in a much more pragmatic kind of way. I love how practical that book is. It almost just gives you a map of like, okay, well, how am I feeling? I'm feeling quite apathetic towards something. All right, I'm right at the bottom of the pit of like the ladder here. Right, okay, well, at least if I feel angry, at least like I've got something to work with. Yeah. Okay, and I'm actually moving through up the different levels to like where I can be. It brings so much awareness of like almost like a workflow for spiritual states in a weird way.
It's totally. For me, honestly, if someone was to say what's the one book you'd recommend on from the spiritual books, I would actually probably say the letting go one, because of the clarity, because it provides that technique that people like Michael Singer, Untethered Soul, and Eckhart, they're all saying the same thing to like a, it's all pretty much the same message, but this one is very much like an app, like you can apply that technique, as you said, and it's like the map of how you feel. I mean, I did that technique I just told myself I'm going to do it like 1 year straight, where whatever I feel that's negative, whatever kind of feelings are going through my body, I'm going to stay with them. Forget about the story in my mind, just stay with the pure feeling itself and like let go of that feeling. I swear I literally like 80% of all my past like issues just melted over that period of time. But it takes time to get into doing it. Like you said, like there's a resistance. It's like going to the gym having not gone to the gym for like 10 years and you go back to the gym. It's extremely difficult to get back into it. It's kind of similar with this. It's like we're so used to avoiding our feelings. So like there's a big resistance to facing the feelings. But once you face the feelings, it's so empowering, and you lose the fear of fear, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all that, the sort of hyper trendy sort of, plant medicine world. Although it's funny to call it hyper trendy considering the fact that we've been doing this for thousands of years. That's all it is. Like, it's just all those experiences have done for me is put me in a position where I have to deal with it. Like, I can't run because there's nowhere to go. And the sort of the plant teacher that I'm working with is very much of an attitude of, no, you're going to sit here and you're going to sort this out because you ain't going any further forward until this happens.
Yeah.
And it's like that stern, like everybody needs like a stern but loving voice of truth. Every now and then, everybody needs like a loving kick up the arse. As we would say in Liverpool, that's a very Liverpool thing. It's like, I'm giving you the kick up the arse because I fucking love you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's so funny, man. So cool that you're into all that, man. Like it's funny because again, like this is one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast, because it's like we've met, we've worked together, we did a couple of releases and stuff like that. We played at a party. It's like I'm never gonna get this out of you, like standing in a DJ booth in the Star of Kings in King's Cross, like.
Yeah, totally. Maybe like a few tequilas in, I'll just start bringing up David Hawkins, but yeah.
Different kind of spirits, my friend. Different kind of spirits.
Different kind of spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe we should eat the worm and then see where it goes. Like.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'll lick a couple of toads and see what happens as well. But there you go. Amazing. So, like, all of that is so relevant to studio work as well, because I found years ago, I've been doing yoga now for nearly 9 years. And I found like when I really got hardcore into yoga, like I was so much more creative and so much more in flow, so to speak. And obviously, like, you know, working on this kind of thing more on the spiritual side of things has helped massively with that as well, because like, what is art other than an expression of your own spirit, essentially? So yeah, it's super interesting to kind of like integrate that into like a studio workflow as well. I mean, have you felt that as well? Like, the more clarity you had spiritually, the more you had creatively as well.
Yeah, definitely. It really, it's like the less mind-based production I'm doing. When I say mind-based, I was using the word feeling, but it's just when I'm more in like a flow and I'm feeling open and present, the music comes out in a way where it's much more, it's translating a feeling. And it's like all the good, like I go back to Pashanga Boy's Time. Like, why do I love that song so much? Because it's translating a feeling. I listen to it and it takes me somewhere nostalgic. It takes me somewhere otherworldly. Like, why? Is it because of the chords they're using? Well, other people use those chords or those progressions or those sounds as well, and you don't get that. It's whatever they've done to make that magic. For me, that's the recipe for the magic. It's not what plugin you have or what hardware you're using or anything like that. Because I've seen time and time again, if I'm working on something and it's just not working, I mean, from a feeling perspective, I can layer it with more stuff and try and make it more clubby sounding or whatever. It's just still not gonna. It's not gonna work. It's like the essence of the track needs to feel right, and then really, actually, the rest. Then you can become a little bit more. For me, I become a little bit more technical in terms of how do I want to structure this track and But I know that the magic and the essence is there, and you take that, and then you structure it how you want to structure it.
Yeah,
from
totally.
A position standpoint.
You're totally right on the plugins and stuff. Because, yeah, we always love a good geek off about, like, what plugins we're using and everything else. But, you know, as you say, like, that's not where it comes from. Because if it was, you would have, like, you know, Michelangelo, like, when he's painting the Sistine Chapel, saying, oh, yeah, it's this particular style of oil paint I'm using, man. It's just... You know, you would never say that. Like, the guy's literally channeling God while he's up there painting the fucking ceiling. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And I know this is crazy, but like, I literally have come to a point where I produce now with just Omnisphere, the plugin. Like, you know, Omnisphere, it's such a powerful plugin, and it has all the kind of sounds that make up what I like to make. I just don't use anything else because I know how to use it really well. Like, I know what sounds I like. So I've like reduced my what I use to like a really few things, and I've found it's so much easier. Like, when I walk into a studio of a friend and they've got like 50 different like synths and it's like all this shit happening and everything, I'm like, do you even use all of this stuff? Like, and how do you decide? And just that time of just thinking, is it, am I using the Moog for this? Am I using this for this? Like, I couldn't do that. It would just cause me anxiety. And as opposed to just knowing, like, I'm going to use this really well. I know, like, what sounds it produces. I know it's flexible enough to give me what I need. And if it's not flexible enough, fine, I'll go and find a solution. I'll go record something live or whatever it is, or try something else out. But it stops the technical stuff getting in the way of the creativity when you have less, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Omnisphere in particular, it's such a desert island plugin, isn't it? It's like, you don't need anything else because it can literally, it's easier to talk about what it can't do than what it can, right?
Yeah, and I know, like, it sounds like I tell that to my friends who they're really into hardware and they're like really against using anything but hardware, and I'm just like, look, play me like one of your hardware things and I'll just do the same thing in Omnisphere. And it's like you don't really hear the difference. I get it. I'm not saying I'm not against hardware. Like, I'm all for it. It's cool. I love the way it looks and feels and it's great. But I've just become really reductive with everything when it comes to music. Like, in terms of, even though in the composition, my compositions are more reductive. Like, for me, that last 20% in producing a track is what can I remove from this that doesn't really add anything. Like, if it's not adding anything, remove it. Like, that is how I see it, and create more like in the mix.
Absolutely. I love that as well, because that's very sort of similar to my sort of approach as well, which was like, for want of a better expression, like, my approach has always been, let's throw as much shit at the wall as possible see what sticks, and then a process of refinement, subtraction, bring it down to what those elements are. I've just done, like, in the last couple of months, like 2-part sort of like melody writing masterclass in our music theory course. And like the one big thing that I taught was, right, okay, write a melody. Here's how you write a melody. Here's the scale. Here's how you do it. Blah 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 blah. Right, now let's get rid of half the notes.
Yeah.
And oh look, we're in exactly the same place. And in fact, we're probably in a more powerful place because we've now got more space to do other things. And it comes back to, I think was it Duke Ellington who said that, or John Coltrane, one of those legendary jazz musicians, who said, like, it's where you don't play the notes, that's where the music happens. Like, it's in the spaces between, that's where the real power is. And that's so true.
So true. So true. And that's actually funny when it comes to the, you mentioned the classical composition, for example, or if I'm sitting with like a pianist sometimes, with like my sister, for example, like she's classically trained pianist. But it's with the music we make, that reduction is really important, and it's almost like each layer needs to be really simple. So sometimes it's like I see my sister playing, like she's like going loads of different things, and it's like, just playing the keyboard like in this really complex way. And I always tell her, like, that will, like in dance, like for the music we're making, at least like in deep house, it doesn't work. You have to almost strip it to really simple melodies, like a simple arp, simple bass line, like very simple chords, and the way those things come together is where you get that kind of magic, especially from that music, that like for the music that people want to like dance to and vibe to.
Yeah, there has to be that sense of space, right? That sense of like allowing people to breathe and be able to almost like enter into the music in a weird way. It's like I find a lot of like, and this is probably old man Nolan talking here a little bit, but I find a lot of like the really big techno stuff, I find it quite oppressive because there's no entry point for me where I can kind of like really immerse myself and be able to kind of get into it. And, my tastes in harder techno have become ever more and more and more minimal because of that, because there's kind of like there's no space for nuance. Do you know what I mean? There's no space for, the smallest change having like the biggest, most dramatic effect. Which again is no sort of slight. It's a perfectly good style, and I've enjoyed a lot of it. But for me, in terms of what it speaks to in my soul, a little bit, like it's tough. Like, because there's no, like we were saying, there's no sort of space, and therefore it becomes more about functionality rather than form.
Yeah, definitely. For you now, what's kind of in the dance industry, that is, in electronic music, what's your kind of favorite style at the moment?
I mean, I'm loving all the organic stuff, to be honest. I've been loving that for years, ever since sort of Lee kind of became the big champion of that whole thing. I think there's still so much untapped potential in it because of the fact that, again, it gives space to allow, lots of different instruments, lots of different aspects, backgrounds, cultures, etc. A couple of weeks ago, I had a guy on who has made one of the best contact libraries I've heard in ages, and it's like traditional Amazonian tribes playing their traditional instruments that they've all made by hand. And he actually went into the jungle and recorded it himself. And what's lovely about it is it's like an All Day I Dream producer's wet dream, this contact instrument, and 30% of every sale goes back to the tribe. So it's like, not only are you making amazing music with this thing, you are actually doing something amazing for them and for the world by making your music. And I think that's a beautiful way forward. So there's a lot of these lovely sort of projects in that space that I love. I am loving the resurgence of breakbeat at the moment. Absolutely adoring it. I was a big prog breaks guy back in the day, sort of like, 2000, 2001, that type of area, the whole Aussie break scene. I was so massively into that. So it's really hugely refreshing to hear that kind of coming back after so many years of it just being sort of relentless, non-stop 4/4, it's nice to hear some sort of, you know, really interesting, you know, experimentations going on in that case. But what's really exciting me now is like all of these genres are starting to kind of mix a little bit. You know, there's a lot of techno I've heard that is starting to use like organic sound sources, like acoustic sound sources, in really interesting ways. Like one of the things I've always been into, I am like the world's biggest Trent Moller fan, and he's been like one of my musical heroes from before I started to learn how to produce. What I loved about what he did, or what he does to this day, is there's this juxtaposition, this very stark contrast of really starkly electronic and really blatantly acoustic, and putting the two together. I think that's really exciting, and I'm starting to hear that more and more. I don't know about you. What are you into at the moment?
I agree with you. For me, the organic, definitely, in the potential of organic house, for sure. I mean, I sometimes do worry in that genre when I go on like Beatport, for example, where people are kind of just fitting in that very specific organic house sound that, you know, that's the main kind of vibe, and not moving away from it. What I'm trying to do is that kind of vibe, because it's just naturally what the kind of music I make is, a little bit more down-tempo organic, but seeing how I can shift it into other genres and do something a little bit different and like unique with it. You know, I have a track now that I don't even know where to send it, to be honest, but it's like, has all the kind of feelings of an organic house track, but then like a very almost pop vocal with it. It's like a commercial track, but it's not a commercial track. It's deep, but it's not deep. It's very hard to pinpoint what it is. And I definitely, as much as it's frustrating in terms of where do I send this, and that's like, you know, how do I release this, it is always good to get to that point where you kind of don't even know what the track is. It's a great place to be, I find. So I agree.
I always think it's a signpost that you've got something special, because it's probably going to transcend genre a little bit and sit across a lot of different things, you know. So it's very, very interesting. Like, you know, it makes you wonder whether or not these pigeonholes we give music are that sort of functional anymore. Like, I only call it organic house because that is the title bestowed upon it by Beatport. It's just a convenient shorthand for that whole scene, you know, and it runs the whole gamut from like the tougher, more bouncy end of things, like a Sebastian Ledger, for example, like right the way through to like Powell, who's like, you know, I've heard some of his tracks and it's like the drums are so light in that thing, it doesn't sound like they're even there half the time. They're almost like an ambient track with a bit of patter in the background, and it works phenomenally well for what he's trying to achieve, you know.
Yeah, totally. It's very, the whole genre thing is really, it's too boxy, for sure. I mean, when I'm always asked by a label, like, what genre should we're thinking of putting this in, like melodic house or deep house, I'm like, honestly, I really don't know, because it's not, I'm not sure what it is. But that's definitely that's a very interesting topic as a whole. It's like, what is, you know, you can make so much, there's so much variation in what you can do from a production standpoint nowadays, that it's like, what is what, and like what's acceptable to play out in a DJ set, what's meant for this, meant for that. It's very interesting.
And the titles themselves, we act like they're solid, like they're these very static, very definitive, like absolutely like line in the sand, this is what this is, and they're not either. Like, even the genres themselves, what they're considered to be is very, very fluid. You know, what's considered to be techno now would have been considered like, you know, tough tribal house 10-15 years ago. You know, this, and again, you've only got to look at like sort of the inadvertent bastardization of progressive house by the more sort of EDM style producers over like 2010 to like sort of 2015, 2016. Like, to know. And also as well, I watched a really interesting video the other day about it was on Resident Advisor's YouTube channel, and it wasn't called this, but the spirit of the video is like, what the fuck happened to tech house, basically. Like, because it's not now what it was back then. Like, I mean, I was buying large, for my record shop, I was buying large quantities from Swag Records and, you know, Teddy Francis stuff and all that kind of thing. Like, that's tech house to me. And it's like, well, what tech house is considered now is, it couldn't be further removed from what that was, you know?
Yeah, it's so true. Like it's just and what tech house is for you, for someone else, tech house is completely different. I mean, it's almost like when people ask what music do you like, I don't know how to answer anymore. It's because it's you don't. What's deep house? I mean, even what's deep house today? It's kind of become more like on Beatport at least. It feels like it's become more of like that disco-y, deeper, classic sounding house. Whereas I would have probably said that all my music was deep house a few years ago. Whereas now would be listed as organic house.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and in 5 years' time, it's probably going to be unrecognizable all over again, right? It's just it's not gonna stand still. That's part of the reason why we love it. But I think all we take these things far too seriously. I think, about what it is, and we need to find out what that is and give it a label. Therefore, it becomes a thing that then becomes like marketable, and it's like it's the whole thing of like I've seen progressive house come back from the dead maybe 4 times in my time. Do you know what I mean? And have its moment and then disappeared again, and then it's like not the done thing, and then it's back 3 years later. And the only thing that those things have all got in common is that Henan Cataneo's gone nowhere, and he's not changed his sound, and he's just done his thing, and the Jesus of prog rises once again. You know what I mean?
So true. That's great.
Yeah, I can say that with all the love in the world for Hernan, because I absolutely adore the man. Like he's been such a he is. I personally think he's one of the nicest men currently walking the face of the earth. Like he's amazing, so supportive and so passionate.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he's really cool. So apart from Omnisphere, then what is the what's the workflow at the moment for you? Like what's the rig? Are you an Ableton guy? Are you a Logic guy? What's the DAW of choice?
Logic, always been Logic. It's because for me I find with Ableton like that, there's the view where you're not arranging, like you're just kind of creating sound.
Session view, yeah.
Session view, yeah. It's cool. I get the pros of it, but I like to kind of just be quickly arranging while composing. And the composition part for me comes the most easily. So I find Logic is a lot easier to kind of just move things around and get to an arrangement more quickly. I find it's a better system to finish tracks. Like I find the arrange in Ableton very hard to use, and I've tried to use Ableton and I'm so slow on it compared to Logic. But that's just because I've used Logic all my life. So
yeah.
Since I started making music.
Yeah, I'm sure you were really happy with Logic's recent attempts at making it more like Ableton as well.
Yeah, I just don't even I don't even go there. Like I just kind of
whisper it quietly. I actually like their version of like what Ableton does, that session view, what they call the live loops view. I actually think it's better than Ableton.
Yeah,
it is, because it's like the Ableton thing's very top down, like an old mod tracker.
Yeah.
Whereas Logic's is like how you would arrange a track. It's like it's from left to right, so it makes perfect sense for me. And I literally, in order to completely equalize my workflow, because I'm a bit of a DAW whore, like I'm across Logic, Cubase, Ableton, you name it. Like I use them like liberally if it's the right thing for the job. Pro Tools, whatever. Like I literally bought one of these, these little Launchpad minis.
Yeah.
So that like literally works like a push controller for Logic. So it's like I just plug that in, and it's the same thing. Do you know what I mean?
Amazing. For you, when you're composing, do you go to Ableton for that?
Yeah, I mean, I love like some of the. I mean, it's a shame. This brings me on to one of my other pet topics: is the almost complete unusability of Ableton Live 11. Like it's a disgrace that what's happened with that. It's like it's been unusable for me since it came out. It's been terrible. But the new more compositional tools are absolutely fantastic. Like they're absolutely brilliant. The way you can like actually fold the piano roll into a particular scale that you're working in is worth the upgrade for that alone. And you can do scale quantize and many other tricks in Logic. Like I know Logic really well too. Like Logic is like if Ableton is my right hand, then Logic's my left hand basically. But it just depends. Like it really depends on what I'm trying to do. And I will use different DAWs to. I suppose it's the same thing as what I was saying about changing your environment in order to kind of like refresh and get a little bit more inspiration. Like sometimes I'll find like I'm a bit sick of Ableton, I'll go into Cubase, and I'm loving Cubase 11 at the moment. I think there's so much good stuff in there. It's such an underrated DAW because it's so dense and it's so capable, but there's a bit of a learning curve to it. But if you're like an uber power user, like it's unreal what that thing is capable of. And Logic, again, I've been using Logic since 2006. So I know it very well. Like my first version of Logic was like Logic 7, back when you still needed the dongle to make it work, in the USB hub, like. But yeah, I love them all for very, very different reasons. They're all very capable. They all roughly do the same thing. It's just depends what kind of language you want to speak at one moment, really.
Yeah, for me, I just always found that it's just because again, I'm not. Like I don't like the very technical. Like I find Ableton is still, you have to really kind of fiddle with it to arrange something. In Logic, I'm just dragging away. Just audio is easier to kind of edit. But that could be just because I've just used it for so long, and I'm very one focused with what I do. I just don't. Once I like something, I'd rather just stay with that. So I always struggled. Especially that everyone I collaborate with is using Ableton. So now we typically, if I'm doing a collaboration session with someone, the other day I actually downloaded the software from Mixed and Key. They have like a collaboration software. And it's pretty solid. Like I'm kind of against those softwares because I feel like it's just a nuisance and it's better just to be in the same room. But this is pretty good. Like you could just sync up, the two doors and you're good to go and to just kind of experiment with ideas. But yeah, I've always, all my Ableton friends are joking because it's like, you're so pro Logic, like you should work for them or something, because Logic and Omnisphere are the two things you just swear by, basically.
Oh, absolutely. But I've got to say, to this day, the undisputed king of not only like value for money, considering what they did with the price of Logic, but the synths you still get with Logic to this day, it's like, Sculpture is still one of my favorite synths because there's just quite literally nothing else like it that I've seen ever since, and that thing has been not touched in any way since like I started using it in like 2006. And you can get sounds out of this thing that no other synth around, whether hardware or software, can do. The stock plugins that you get with Logic for me are still far and away superior than any other DAW. And there's things that, because my workflow for the longest time has been composition and actually like writing the track in Ableton, and then I'll mix the thing down in Logic. Because I love...
Yeah, because it shows the kind of arrangement view of Logic is so solid. It's so good in terms of just kind of getting a nice arrangement together. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And for me, it's like I'm an old school mixer in a way. Like when I mix tracks, I don't like spectrum analyzers. I don't like visual input. I've learned over many, many years of ear training to like really, really trust my ears and not like, let my sense of sight override what my ears are trying to tell me. So I love like the mix of you like in Logic, and a lot of the time I'll be mixing with just that window, like, and nothing else open. And even the plugins that I use to mix, like, it's mostly third-party stuff, but there's no like spectrum analyzers by and large. It's all just emulations of analog gear, and all they do is like have a red light that just flashes when it's overdriving, and that's about it. Like that's kind of my workflow. I like to recreate like an analog like recording chain in the box. Like that's kind of like my big thing. I'm finding increasingly I'm mixing more of my tracks in Cubase as well, because I love the workflow of that, and with the fact that I've been in that LA film music scene for a while now. It's like a lot of the big guys are using Cubase, so it makes it like from a collaborative standpoint, if I have to work with, like I've done in the past with the likes of a Junkie XL or someone like that, he's a big Cubase head. It's just easy to kind of pass sessions to and from. So, there's there's nothing wrong with any of them, you know. It's just about what works for you. And I go through, as I say, I go through phases where it's like it's one. Like I went through a phase where I all but stopped using Ableton for a good while, and then I went through a phase where I all but stopped using Logic, and then another phase where all I wanted to use was Logic. You know, it just depends on what works for you at that moment.
I'm very interested in by the Ableton, like kind of building live sets in terms of performance-wise what it can do, because it's not something I've ever done, but I would love to slowly move into that a little bit. The thing is, I just find it's one of those places where if you go into it, you really have to go into it to do it well. But because I love improvising a lot, and everything I make, it comes from like just being highly improvisational, I would love to take my DJing to a more kind of live performance side. And from that, what I hear from that side, Ableton's, you know,
oh yeah,
is really good.
Yeah, well, you think about it, right? I mean, everything that you've spoken about when it comes to Ableton, like what did Ableton actually start out life as? It was a live looping tool. It was actually built to be a live performance rig that almost like, you know, reverse engineered itself into being a DAW. Like that's the truth of it, you know. Like I remember, like my first version of Ableton was Live 3. Like that's how far back I go with Ableton, and you couldn't even load MP3s into the thing. Like it was WAV only. There was no predictive warping. You had to do everything yourself, and it was tough. Like, but once you got it into a position, you could do some wild stuff with it that no other DAW could do, and it did definitely change the game in that front. So, you know, I still think of it primarily as a performance tool that has DAW capabilities, whereas Logic, Cubase, all the rest that we've mentioned are, you know, far more sort of like the traditionalists kind of thing. It's like those guys have been there for a long time. They've done largely the same thing for decades basically, and they're very, very good at what they do if you're a straight up producer. So it's funny you mentioned about the live stuff as well, because like we recently launched a course with a great young Dutch kid called Holt, and he does live performance. So he did a course for us where he writes a track from scratch and then shows you how he plays it live. So that might be something you might be interested in having a look at, actually, because it's great. But he takes it another stage further because he built his own controller. Like, okay, what? So imagine like basically like a younger Stefan Bodzin with hair. Basically, younger Stefan Bodzin with hair and better. Basically, that's what Holt is basically to us. So yeah, he was doing crazy stuff. Like he was ripping apart like this controller he built. He ripped apart like two APC 40s and an Akai keyboard, and then put it into a custom box and made it all talk to each other. And now he can do like complete live performances and hybrid DJ sets, and he doesn't even have to look at his laptop. And the next version of this controller that he's building will be able to control the fucking lights in a club.
Wow.
Like he'll be able to do everything. Like, you know, I joked. I said, you know, remember those buttons you used to see in 80s movies where there was a little glass box around it? It's like, would you have one of those for the smoke machine that you had to flip it up and then like flick it, you know, that kind of thing. But that's where it's heading to. It's heading in this really interesting hybrid direction of like live and DJing, and it becoming kind of something else, basically.
That's been on my mind, and that's what's interesting about it, because it starts to become about how do you like building a setup that allows you to kind of merge production and live together in that way and be able to do that, which is the opposite of my production approach, which is like super lean and super like focused. But it's something I feel from a performance side would be invaluable to do that, to start to move in that direction and have that capability.
Oh yeah,
sure.
100%. I mean, like having seen like Jeff Holt play a few times live and seen a few other artists doing it over the last few years. Like I've spoken about this a couple of times, but back in like 2016, I opened for Max Cooper in Belfast, and I turned up with me pair of headphones and my little USB stick, thinking I was the shit. And then Max turns up with 2 laptops, a whole host of controllers, and he's controlling the audio and the visuals at once. And if he wanted to, he could probably do it in 5.1 surround at the same time. And I felt very silly that night and came away from it thinking, I've got to fucking up my game here. Like, this is like I've just seen the future, you know. And lo and behold, like that's the direction that it's all kind of heading in, really. You know, like I've been saying for a while now that I think playing other people's records one after the other is possibly living something of a charmed life at the moment, and 3 to 5 years we'll look back at it and go, oh look, he's playing one record after another. Cute.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting because I love the idea of both, in the sense, if you can play the classic DJ set in a way that it's just, it's if you do it in a good way and you really make people dance and you take people on a great journey, and it's great. And it's different because you're getting maybe like a wider range. You have a wider range of like the sound possibilities, because probably if you're kind of coming in with a more kind of production-based live set, it's going to be very focused to your sound, so it might be very melodic techno or very, whatever it might be. So that's the only thing, is I love such a wide range of music. So I do love the idea of like a classic DJ set where I, in the middle of the night can drop some disco in, whatever it might be. But I also love the idea of almost producing live and having a live set where it's like all my own stuff. It's all original. It's like my own tracks deconstructed and brought back in different ways. I mean, they're both really exciting ideas in terms of how one performs.
Well, that's it. I think it's all going to find an audience, and I think it's all going to find a space ultimately. So it's just yet another sort of exciting development of tethering that towards things like audio visual stuff. I do a lot of work on the immersive audio side as well. Like I've been deep into like research and development with that for a while now, where really bringing like surround sound into the club sphere, like properly, like for real, and in a way that will give the artist like ultimate control over what people hear, and just creating far more immersive and far more kind of emotional experiences for people in the club, and all the way up to like festival size situations. It's all doable. So we're heading into one of those kind of like points of inflection where several technologies are going to come together, and like over the next 3 to 5 years, like shit's going to get wild. Like we're going to pinch ourselves in a few years and think, look how far we've come in just the last few years. And I think the end of the pandemic will provide a huge push, a huge forward momentum, and a huge catalyst for a lot of that change.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that kind of comes into, I mean, I'm very interested in immersive experiences from like the art perspective. Like, just from my life of going to art galleries, I'm always underwhelmed by like the immersive exhibitions. I mean, there's a few that are really cool and people that do cool stuff, like 180 Strand, like Vinyl Factory here in London have done some great stuff. But in general, I love the idea of like allowing people to enter an experience it's not like it's not a party, but it's something to do with how you bring music and visuals together in an immersive environment to create like a unique experience. And I also think that's another side from the art world that's going to be like the future, as opposed to just looking at like a painting on a wall, which is still great and amazing. You have these kind of full-blown immersive experiences that take people into like a different world. And I see that a lot of the NFTs, because a lot of the NFTs that do really well are like these otherworldly kind of visuals where you look at it, it's like some alien on a different planet or something. So it's doing that kind of transporting someone, but in a physical space. And that's where all of the kind of, as you said, surround sound stuff could be really interesting.
No, it really is. I mean, there's a huge amount already going on in that space as well, because as I say, I work a lot with D&B Audio on that, because their sound systems are just unbelievable. And, their soundscape systems, I've been working with them now for 2.5 years now, and they're just unbelievably flexible. When you consider that they were the sound systems that powered Kraftwerk's 3D tour and Bjork's last tour before the pandemic as well. You get an idea of like just how capable these things are, and it's been a massive privilege and a project of a lifetime, really, to be involved, to adapt it to the club space and help, like, hopefully kind of redefine what artists are going to be able to do, and how it's going to create really quite. When you think about those experiences, right, that we've had on dance floors, those moments that have shaped us or like changed our lives a little bit in some way, like, you know, to provide the means to do that in a much more immersive and a much more meaningful way has been a real privilege, actually. And, you know, it's something I can't wait to get back to once things normalize a little more.
Definitely. That's super interesting.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So what's the future looking like for you then, mate, in terms of like releases and stuff? What have you got coming down the pipe? Because it sounds like you got quite a lot of rounds in the chamber, so to speak, ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a few things with When We Dip's label Tour, which I really love them as a label. They just have great branding and they're very organized.
Yeah, they're great. I love Dermot and the guys there. I'm big fans of them. They've been helping me out for a long time, and I've been releasing on XYZ as well.
They're really great. So I like their approach. And then Tail and Tone will be a great release. Hodge and Libarge's label. Very organic house vibes. That track is. And then, I've got a lot. I just really spent the whole lockdown just kind of pumping tracks out. So I'm slowly just seeing which ones should go out, maybe where to release them. And it's been nice to kind of just take it slow again and not like rush to kind of just push the music out, but really like, take the time and sit with the track for a while, like even listen to it a month later and see how I'm feeling about it. It's been a slower, more creative process that I'm enjoying.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's also an important thing that, you know, I'm seeing a lot of people now. Things seem to be taking a turn for the better, and there seems to be some events coming back. And a lot of people getting into that rush thing as well of like, oh no, I've been sat on my arse for the last year and I need to get loads of music ready for when the clubs reopen and stuff. It's like, dude, you've got time. Like, you've got time. Like, it's still gonna be there. You know, it's like, ironically, like the club shut for a year and it still didn't go away. So I think, you know, you've got all the time in the world, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
No, definitely. Dude, this has been a real pleasure. This has been a treat, my friend. It's been amazing to catch up with you. Also to get to know you that bit better, you know?
Likewise. No, it's great that we got to catch up, and when you're in London next, or in LA, we'll see where we meet next. But...
Well, yeah, we'll be that pair of wankers that decide which side of the Atlantic to meet up at. Mate, well, you know, hopefully, you know, in the near future, or you know, in times, we'll be able to do this in person. We'll get another episode in when the time's right.
Perfect, great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me,
mate. And you, man. Thanks very much. Catch new episodes of Beyond the Studio every single week on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your podcasts.